Hello, respected viewers, I'm George from Ireland. So here I am on the beach at Viareggio, Italy. And it's on this beach, 200 years ago, less 10 days, that Percy Bysshe Shelley's body washed up, along with the two other men who drowned on his boat Ariel with him. They drowned 10 days earlier. Their boat had foundered somewhere here in the Gulf of Lerici, or the Gulf of La Spezia, some people call it, because La Spezia, that major port which is a bit to the north. Anyway, so their bodies could only be identified by the clothes, and Shelley's body was horribly swollen because, of course, he died so much earlier and had been partly eaten by fish. So it was, by all accounts, a ghastly scene, and Leigh Hunt couldn't bear to see it any longer. So he got into his horse-drawn carriage and waited there whilst the bodies were cremated here on the sand, because the local sanitary law required that bodies that were recovered in such circumstances be immediately burnt, and indeed they were. The ashes were collected. Shelley's heart, for some reason, would not burn, and Edward Trelawney put his hands in, badly burning them, into the embers and retrieved Shelley's heart. They'd also been able to identify Shelley's dead body because there was a copy of Keats's Lamia in the pocket, and it's been conjectured that this is actually what cost Shelley his life. As the boat was tipping over, did he take a second to actually put it into his pocket? Maybe he wasn't actually standing reading it when the storm suddenly blew up. So it was a tempest which sunk his boat, but some people said it was a poorly designed boat. It was little more than a floating coffin, and it didn't stay afloat for long. So they'd set sail from Livorno, which is a bit further south, and I was there earlier today, and they were going to sail to meet Leigh Hunt and Lord Byron and others to discuss launching a magazine styled The Liberal. The magazine did indeed get going. Of course, Shelley didn't live to see it, but the magazine did not survive him by many years. So Liberal had only just begun to be a word in English with a political meaning. So his dear friends saw him burned, his dead body burned. Women did not attend the funeral, as it's thought to be unhealthy for women to do so. So the ashes were then brought to the British consul at Rome, kept there for several months before they were buried in the Protestant graveyard, or I should say the non-Catholic graveyard to be more accurate, there in Rome. Edward Trelawney brought the plot beside Shelley, and he lies there for all eternity. And on Shelley's headstone you can see a quotation from Ariel's song from The Tempest by William Shakespeare. Of course, Ariel being the name of the boat on which Shelley lost his life, and it was a tempest that cost him his life. There's a curious circularity to all this. I thought the surname Shelley, but he died amongst the seashells, if you will, so some nominative determinism there. Nomen est omen, as he would have known that Latin tag. Anyway, and the heart was retrieved by Trelawney, and I think given to Leigh Hunt, who kept it for years, preserved in alcohol, wrapped up in a sheet of Keats's noble prose, and despite repeated entreaties from Mary Shelley, that's Percy Bysshe Shelley's widow, for decades refused to hand it over, he finally gave in and gave it to her, and the heart is buried in Bournemouth. So that was what happened to the last remains of Percy Bysshe Shelley. And I'm trying to remember that quotation from Shakespeare's Tempest that's actually engraven upon Shelley's headstone, like, nothing of him doth remain, but that doth change to something rich and strange. And it's very apposite that the last word on his tombstone should be strange, for he very much was. He was never accused of normality. So this was then part of the kingdom of Sardinia. Sardinia wasn't just an island as part of the mainland there, the kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont. So yeah, that is Viareggio, this quite ordinary Italian town on the Ligurian, what would you call it, Riviera, just down the road from Forti dei Marmi, which is a rather more she resort, which is sort of like Milan by the sea, where wealthy northern Italians go for the summer. Used to be wealthy Russians, not so much this year. So what else should I tell you about the end of Shelley? Well, that was it. I mean, obviously his family were frantic when he didn't turn up that night, because the voyage was only supposed to take a few hours, and he was a fairly experienced seaman. So had they set out when they should have known that a storm was coming? Was that foolhardy of them? He'd been sailing since his childhood, or was it just the poor design of the boat, or was it just misfortune? But anyway, this misadventure cost them their lives. There is a theory that their boat was willfully rammed by local men who wanted to rob them, but none of their precious items were taken. There's no evidence they were rammed apart from this rumour that went around later, because they were known to be affluent. Shelley was from a very rich family. In modern terms, his family were multi-millionaires, which is why able to raise lots of loans on the strength of his going to inherit an awful lot of money. But his father seemed to be immortal, living to the age of 90, which in the 19th century was almost unheard of. Anyway, so Shelley never worked a stroke. He lived by his quill, but mostly was in debt. So we owe a lot of credit to his creditors. People were imprudent enough to advance him loans when he never ever repaid a brass farthing. But Percy was known for his deep sympathy for the downtrodden, for the impecunious, but he never gave them a brass farthing. He always spent it on himself. So I think his compassion towards the needy is something which is a little exaggerated. If you really cared for them, why didn't you give them any money then? And he never lived badly. He always had at least a middle-class standard of living. But bear in mind that he was an aristocrat. He was in line to inherit a baronetcy, though obviously he didn't live to do so. His son, Florence Percy Shelley, did inherit it, the third baronet of Castle Goring. And his youngest son was indeed born at Firenze, Italy, which is why he's named Florence. And who crossed over with the Shelleys in that city? It was the Nightingales, as in Florence Nightingale was born there in 1820 when the Shelleys were in this part of Italy. But they led a very peripatetic lifestyle, bohemian, indeed chaotic. So there was a restlessness about him. His life was in turmoil, but he was born in a Europe in turmoil. Born in 1792, born a month before the abolition of the French monarchy, because his birthday was the 4th of August. So you must remember that for most of his life, until 1815, it wasn't safe for Britons to go to the continent, because so much was French dominated, he would have been interned. There are only two brief periods in that, 1801 to 1802, and a few months in 1814 into early 1815, when Britons could go there. But after the final defeat of Napoleon, for the first time it was safe to go to the continent, and indeed he did. So he moved to Italy in 1816, briefly went back to Britain in 1818, back to Italy again, and doesn't seem to have any intention of returning to the United Kingdom. Nothing but a cell in a debtor's prison awaited him if he did, because by this point he was tens of thousands of pounds in debt. You can put 2 noughts on the end of that to try and get the modern values. So his creditors somehow managed to track him down, were sending him harassing letters here. Well, I don't blame them. But how did they find out where he was? Long before the internet and phone books and stuff like that. Now, I know the population of Italy was about 1/10 of what it is today, so he would have stood out like a sore thumb here. Maybe some of the British expatriate community, and it was tiny, who knew him, informed his creditors in London, because they had a grudge against him. They very much disapproved of the fact that he was an atheist. He travelled all around Switzerland and in various guest books writing Percy Shelley, atheist. Other people would have put Esquire or gentleman or something. So Robert Southey, the future poet laureate, a one-time patron of Shelley's, found out about this, and he very much disapproved. Shelley had been friends with Southey, even though Southey, or Southey as some pronounce it, was a Tory, and indeed later became poet laureate, partly because he was very much pro-establishment. So thank you very much for watching my videos. Urgently need donations as always, so kindly donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Toodle pip.